Hi, I'm Fred Noyce, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Any fan of modernism probably has Dwell magazine somewhere in their house. It's a relatively recent publication, started in 2000 by Lara Hedberg Deam in San Francisco. She's still the owner, and like a winning NFL coach, she's been stocking the team over nearly 20 years with winning players like Karrie Jacobs, Michela O'Connor Abrams, Amanda Dameron, and former podcast guest Alison Arieff ever since.
With a motto of "at home in the modern world," Dwell helped re-energize a terrazzo, that's our new collective noun, of modern movements. Small houses, modern houses, greenhouses, sustainable houses, micro houses, and prefab houses. Today, we go remote with host George Smart in New York. George sits down with Bill Hanley, editor and chief of Dwell since February 2019. Hanley is a New York City-based writer, editor, and media producer. He focuses on design, art, and urbanism. He was previously the digital director at Surface Magazine, senior digital editor at Architectural Record, news editor at ARTnews, staff writer at Rhizome, and editor at ArtInfo. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll and Nichiha.
Durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nichiha. Nichiha, Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha, Nichiha. That's H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
We now take you to George Smart and Bill Hanley inside the Dwell conference room in New York.
So, before we get started, I got to ask about your tattoo. At one time, you were going to get a tattoo of this kind of Miesian structure. Did that ever happen? Because I thought that was the coolest tattoo design ever.
No, that was the Maison Dameron from a pretty famous Mies drawing. It was more just kind of a prompt to people on social media to talk me into it or out of it. I actually don't have any tattoos. I'm sorry to disappoint everyone.
Okay. So did they rally against it? Was there a groundswell?
Oh, yeah. Like what? I can't remember exactly. I had a former intern who was really disappointed that I didn't actually do it. But yeah, I've managed to resist some really terrible tattoo ideas over the years, and I wasn't about to start in my late 30s.
Was that the most sort of classic design-oriented idea you've had?
Yeah, I guess that, it's a bit of a smirk, right? I mean, it would be a pretty pretentious tattoo. I suppose it's the most seriously I've thought about it, but I never really got to the point of trying to find an artist who could, replicate the drawing.
Because I saw a picture of someone's arm.
Yeah, I just Googled that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not your arm.
No, apparently I'm not the first person to think of this, but
Tell me, how did you get started doing writing and editing and shaping design and observing the environment?
I mean, I started out mostly covering visual art with a bit of a focus on video and digital media work, and I've always had one foot in the print side, one foot on the digital side. My career has sort of followed the, exciting rise of digital journalism and, of course, the evisceration of traditional publishing business models. And so it's something that I've always looked at as, I wanted to help solve because it opened such a new range of ways of telling a story, many different sort of like tools in your toolkit for taking, whether it's art or design or any of the sort of cultural things that I've covered to different audiences through different channels, podcasts, for example. And this kind of proliferation of media and proliferation of ways of telling stories has been really, really exciting. And, I think we are sort of seeing a moment where some publications, Dwell Among them, has really figured out how to create more, diversified streams of revenue and really sort of, starting to build healthy businesses around a more of a contemporary landscape. So to go back to how I got started and with all of this, I helped launch an art website kind of early in my career. I've always been interested in some form of academia focused on digital media and exhibition spaces, specifically museums and collections, and the way that digital artwork is archived, ideas of authenticity around that, and preservation around that. I was always sort of fascinated by it. But then I started writing short form art reviews and suddenly realized that I could get paid to go see interesting things and, explain why I thought other people should also go see these interesting things in a way that had so much...
And was this getting published to a website or to a publication? Where were the art reviews going?
I was doing some for ARTnews. I was a staff writer for Rhizome, the new museum's digital media platform, for a while. Suddenly the idea of spending, the next 7 to 10 years in the library seemed less appealing with all, sort of apologies to my friends in the academic world. I realized that my metabolism was much faster than that. So I had the opportunity to work on an art website. This was, 15 years ago at this point, almost. Yikes. And then I guess I've always been interested in museums and institutions and kind of these major points in the cultural landscape of cities, the way that sort of art and urbanism intersects. It seems a little sidelong from the digital media focus, but it's actually thinking about the types of experience and encounter one has with cultural institutions. I've always been interested in the way that people encounter interesting collections, exhibitions, institutions, things like that, and it seemed like every museum in the U.S. was adding a new wing or something prior to the 2008 economic crisis, and so...
Boom times.
Yeah, I guess. So I started writing a little bit more about architecture just kind of through that, and I eventually took a job at Architectural Record to run their kind of nascent digital program in, I guess that was late 2008. That became that was an incredible education for me, working with some of the people on staff there are absolutely phenomenal. Their editor, Kathleen McQuiggan, is a huge sort of mentor and is something of an inspiration, probably the reason that I stuck around there for many years. Suzanne Stevens, who would edit me brutally in a way that I've really learned from over time, just in trying to write with a lot more rigor about design. I had the opportunity to cover some really exceptional projects and meet a whole lot of really interesting designers during that period, and I pivoted very hard into the design world as a result of that experience. I'll still write about visual art here and there, and my wife's an art writer, and it's very much part of my life, but I don't know. The gloss I always put on it is, if you're a sculptor and you have an exhibition open, 200 people in the world might care, or it's a pretty finite audience. Let's say, if you're a designer and you have a new project on the cityscape, 200 people in the world might care, but everybody's going to have to deal with it. And so the stakes, started to appeal to me as well. It's sort of, how is the sort of physical landscape of a place constituted through this work, and how are the many variables that go into a project being realized, navigated, expressed. I mean, that's a very, very interesting story.
Did you usually catch these projects in the early stages where they were being talked about, or after they were built and done?
It really depends. It's been a different process at lots of different publications too. At Record, we worked with some really stellar photographers who were always, they tend to be among the first people to get called when a project is ready for prime time. But then there are also things that you just track for years, right? I mean, there are certain houses that I'm dying to publish that aren't going to be in Dwell that aren't going to be ready for a long time. So, with Dwell, I am trying to be really proactive about working with designers and the owners commissioning these homes very early on in the process, or sort of as it's kind of nearing completion, just to track what's going on. Not that we'll necessarily publish the end results, but just
right.
Being actively aware of what's going on out there and having a sense of what's coming down the pike, because I do have that sort of my metabolism is the internet, right? It's I love print magazines, and I love all of the cliches about tactility and crafting an object, but the speed at which I work and the speed of the way that I think about these things is sort of drawn from digital media. So there's a slowness to the end product that I think is really, really valuable, but the way that you have to work as an editor in terms of tracking good things as they're coming down the pike, and sort of really being hyper aware of what's going on out there at any given time. If you look at part of what appealed about joining Surface Magazine a few years ago is the fact that there is such an attention to this beautiful object as the end result, and kind of having a product that you put out there in the world that is kind of worthy of the beautiful design work you're covering inside. I want to bring that spirit to Dwell as well. I want to do a service to the furnishings, lighting, well-crafted objects in the book that we cover. We should have an object that's worthy of that. It's an incredibly non-succinct way of putting that. But, you have to kind of think and pay attention to what's going on in the design world with the speed of digital media. Even if part of your output is a video series that requires some time to consume, or a print magazine that you deal with as an object. Then you also have to create stories that are very, very short form for the web. The things that you read at the office when you should be doing something else. The things that tell the story in more sort of succinct but no less valuable ways.
So for those people that are unfamiliar, that are not in the design profession, tell us a little bit about some of the basic differences between Architectural Record and Surface.
Well, Architectural Record is probably 130 years old.
Yeah.
Fact check that. Probably a 130-year-old design journal that really is the point of reference for what's going on in the contemporary architecture world for people who are very much inside that world.
It's outlasted everybody.
It has outlasted everybody, and I think it's a really important thing to have within that profession, too. Just a publication that is on a steady basis doing a kind of temperature taking or doing a kind of survey of the important work that's going out there. It really is a log and a chronicle. I mean, you can look up contemporaneous reviews of the Guggenheim Museum and things like that.
Every building you can possibly name.
I mean, it's a really lovely, getting to dig around in the archive was really, really fun too while I was there. So I mean, I think it's a really important thing to have within that profession too, to have this kind of authoritative chronicle that has some of the most stellar editors in the business working on it too, that is a really important way of covering design too. I should add, it's one of the few publications out there where you can be confident that someone has set foot in the building that they're writing about, which I know seems pretty fundamental, but when you have a 24-hour churn of stories dropped about new projects on various websites all the time, there's a reliability to, or an authority really, to the way that Record will talk about something that only comes from the fact that someone has actually experienced this. Again, it seems really basic.
Someone's been there.
Someone's been there. I mean, which is, also something I take very seriously at Dwell, too, is, in order to give an audience a proper understanding of what it's like to be in a space, one has to be in the space. It's not just a sort of design concept that responds to a brief, but really I want to give people a sense of what it's like to be in a home, to experience, the way that this architecture works in situ, I guess.
Right.
But so the major difference with Surface is it's entirely consumer facing. I mean, there's a sense that it's for people from a sort of design cognoscenti or something like that. But as I mentioned earlier, design is really the middle of the Venn diagram where architecture, fashion, travel all overlap, art. And there are people within each of those fields who will turn to Surface to see what's new and interesting in some of the other ones as well. And one thing that I loved about that magazine is, we had a sort of benchmark for who we were kind of covering. Are they a legend or are they a discovery? It was really, not to say that we didn't cover people in the middle of their careers as well and things like that, but because it's independent, we had the freedom to give a lot of play to someone who might be brand new on the scene, whose work is just stellar and we really believe in. Or, we also had the ability to do profiles of sort of legends in the architecture field that might not necessarily be known to someone in the fashion space or vice versa. Or someone, we did an art issue with Daniel Hume from 11 Madison Park on the cover, who's a collector and also has a lot of interesting things to say about visual art. So the ability to kind of play people against type as well was something that I really enjoyed about working on that publication.
Now, one of our more senior listeners told me that every year he couldn't wait until April when the Architecture Record Houses issue would come out. And when Dwell came out in 2001, it was like having it every month.
I'll respond to that. They're similar, but they're not the same, right? The Record Houses issue, again, it is more that sort of authoritative, it's that authoritative chronicle that doesn't necessarily sum up a year of residential design in a month, but it's really distillation of some of the best work out there and hopefully an interesting plurality of different places and people and ideas in residential design. With Dwell, it's much more about the interaction between the person who owns the house and the architect and how, and this is something that I want to come through in the publication even more than it already does, but this is really about the way someone wants to live, right? There is a sense of who is this owner? What is the life that they want to frame with this project? Is it whether it's their dream house they've wanted to build their whole lives, or their fifth house and they collect work by interesting designers? From the very modest scale, and you'll see in the current issue some things that are really tiny and ingenious, to a really grand scale where it's an owner working with an architect to really do something that changes the way that we think about what a house can be.
Oh, yeah. We had Josh Ramos on the show recently,
that's great, yeah.
Who's designing a $20 million, $200 million, some enormous house out on Long Island that is a ring of houses, essentially, around one central core.
That's kind of amazing. And also, I'm going to see if he has plans to publish that anywhere. But if the client will chat with us. But for Dwell, it's really about how the architecture and, real life interacts, right? It's
all those little decisions you have to make, and
those little decisions you have to make, and also what's the set of what are the set of values about how we should live now that are articulated by a project, right? this isn't just an architectural exercise. This isn't us just riffing on the history of residential design or riffing on or coming up with some sort of response to, the constraints of the site. So it's, if I can say one thing about what I want to bring to the way that we talk about residential design in Dwell, I really want all of our stories, whether it's a 4-part video series on the site or it's something in the feature well of the book, to have a sense of narrative. There's a way of writing about design that is very formulaic, right? I mean, there's a couple was adding an addition to their house because grandma was moving in and they had a tricky site with a steep grade change and
yada.
Yeah. I mean, just like, treating the owner as a walking punch list, right? Treating the client as a walking design brief. And then the designer came up with a solution to these problems and they all lived happily ever after. I mean, I really want what we are doing to capture the kind of blood in the veins of those stories and sort of, well, who is this person? Why do they want to live like this? What's up with grandma? Like, I mean, what is the sort of dynamic that is...
Yeah, did grandma have any role in this house early on?
If she's going to be living in this addition. So a way that doesn't necessarily... A way of talking about the design that's really focused on the way that someone wants to live and the way that, like, a designer and the ideas that a designer has about, about framing that and enabling that, or sort of putting guardrails on that. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that a sort of designer can respond to that as well. So with that comes a storytelling that's a little bit more driven by character than typical architectural writing, a little more driven by narrative, like what is the really what's at stake here and how does it sort of resolve. It's not just...
Well, you're also getting more into the balance between intention and discovery. Mm-hmm. On the client side, like, what ideas did they bring in and what got drawn out of them by this talented architect along the way.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the cliche architect as therapist or something like that, But really it's just, who are these people and why do they want to live this way? And, what does this say about how we should be living now?
So speaking of that, I know a lot of residential architects particularly use questionnaires sometimes or do interviews with the client as well as getting to know them. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, I remember reading about Richard Neutra. He would just go live with the family for about a week and hang out and watch them. What architects now are like Neutra? Do you know any that actually really hang with the family?
Someone who's really moved in?
Yeah, I mean, like really getting the family, getting what grandma is up to.
I'm sure some of them, but I can't think of anyone who's moved in for a week. But I don't know. I mean, different architects have different approaches to this, right? I mean, it's part of selecting who you want to work with. What's your rapport like? What is your, do you have a productive tension, or it's a perfectly balanced collaboration? But everyone's bedside manner is a little bit different with a client, and it's really about finding a dynamic, less like, I don't know, maybe less so like just moving in and sort of like, walking in someone's shoes or, whatever, shadowing a family that closely, shadowing an owner. It's more about like what is the dialogue. It's really about the back and forth. And even if your aesthetic taste is perfectly sympathetic with a particular designer, like that doesn't necessarily mean that the rapport and back and forth of ideas throughout the design process is going to be something that's like ultimately productive. It's really that.
Has Dwell ever done a story did you know of about a real train wreck, about the client and the architect that just made a mess?
Not that I know of. I mean, that's a tough, like...
Sure, it's
tough.
I mean,
this is something...
The space among clients who I hang out with a lot is full of these stories.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, you want to hold up things that went really well, but were not entirely unproblematic either. You want to get into when things had to change course throughout a project, but and I'm sure some of the things that we published, the end result of, had a backstory that was calamitous. But I mean, you really wouldn't necessarily want to get into a calamitous backstory unless there was something really instructive about it, right? I mean, it's like writing criticism. Like if you're really eviscerating a project, you're not necessarily doing it it just to express your own taste. Hopefully you're doing that in order to ask an audience to think about the, criteria that you've set out that this building has not met.
With progressive architecture gone in 95 and other kind of residential publications not really focusing on modern, is Dwell the lead publication for this niche?
Other people cover modern residential design or sort of contemporary residential design that has a kinship with aesthetic modernism here and there. I mean, we are
we're
the only publication I can think of that is really doing this, that is dedicated to this. I mean, it's one of the things that I think has, given me such a reverence for the brand over the years is kind of to champion this kind of work consistently and to do it in a way that really no one else is. Other people have here and there, but I mean, really it's unique in that way that it's kind of occupied this space for a long time. I mean, there are other people that do things here and there, but it's,
You're the category killer, I think.
I think we own it and we're the touchstone and a champion for, a certain architecture that not only pays like aesthetic homage to modernism, but like is really sort of born out of a set of ideas about, how covering the ideas about how one should live rather than sort of limiting to just like aesthetic or decor or celebrity or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, that's what separates you from something like Architectural Digest, where we get Jennifer Aniston over in her villa or whatever.
I mean, we've published work that by well-known owners, but we'll also cover people who, that's not a criteria for.
Right, of course.
It's one more element in a story that's fundamentally focused on the design.
I'm always interested when we're putting together our archives of finding the celebrity renters. The ones that came in and rented a marquee house for 5 years or sometimes 20 because they just had to be there and loved it so much they almost couldn't get out.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I mean, I'd love to hear that in the archive. But celebrity will never be like, the crux of a piece in Dwell. But it is a way in for a lot of readers, I mean, right. It's a personality that you have some kind of connection to. And, seeing how they live sure has a certain amount of lurid voyeurism to it. But it also is like, it can be a gateway to having a lively conversation about design.
I'm always interested because it seems like there's not that many celebrity modern homeowners. They tend to gravitate a lot more to the Spanish and Italian villa and mansions of the 20s. I mean, the culture of modernism was much more populated by Hollywood in the 50s and 60s and 70s than it is now. Mm-hmm. It's great that you can open up a Dwell and just see that, like, here's something that the average modernist fan can go for.
Totally.
And has all these kinds of options about not only how do you find it, how do you build it, how do you decorate it, how do you plan your life in it, all of that. But it's also looking forward. And the question I want to ask you is, now that you're in this position and at the helm, what's coming down the pike for Dwell? Where do you want it to go?
Well, I mean, if we create a sort of universe of editorial work that sort of speaks to a couple of different audiences, really. I mean, ideally, it is for someone who is interested in design. It's part of their identity, right? You're someone who has an affinity for, not just modernism, but like sort of the range of what's going on in the design world. And, you check in on a day-to-day basis in order to see what we're kind of holding up as the most interesting, work going on right now is. Then we also want to be a resource for people who are actively working on a project, right? I mean, we, cover a lot of practical things in the home design space in addition to the story behind it. It's also, there are things that are instructive about the stories that we tell. Hopefully we even play matchmaker between designer and client sometimes, or at least, expose people to the universe of different materials, products, other, kind of practical things that they could put to work in their own own kitchen renovation, say. And then on the other side of that equation, we're read by a lot of professionals as well. Mm-hmm. So, I really want to position this magazine as being absolutely essential to the professional in terms of understanding what's going on in their field right now and having a broad understanding of, what's happening in residential right now. I want this to be sort of, an essential read for those people. So it's really kind of that three-part. If we're looking at our audience as having sort of three key components, I want to create work that sort of speaks to each of those and also sort of be emphasizing a lot of video work, things done in series where we follow a project. We, not only get to know the owner a little bit as a character. What are their sort of, concerns, ambitions, and what does this project represent to them? Get to know the designer kind of on a studio visit basis. What is the sort of animating force behind your practice? What are the ideas that you bring to discussions with clients? And then really looking at the end product home tour, not as just kind of glamour shots, but as the outcome of this dynamic. Right. And so we'll be doing, more video in series, more just practical things, more video in series, and all of the stories that we cover in the book will sort of represent that. We'll be adding a bit of geographic diversity to this as well. I really want to be sure that we're looking to lots of different parts of the world for where we find the work to cover. And then I want to contextualize what we're doing on the residential design side with what's going on in the design world generally. From where are these ideas emerging, whether that means covering more exhibitions, projects of different types that are influencing residential design right now, and just sort of broader ideas in the design space. And then also, diving more into the people behind it. So when we cover furnishings, lighting, other products, and things like that, for example, there's the practical side. On our website, you can literally acquire furnishings and lighting and things like that. But then if you're not necessarily in the market for a faucet right now, I want to give you something more valuable than just sort of pointing at something new for the sake of it being new. So I want to introduce, the people behind those things. Who's the designer? Who made this? What were they thinking about when they...
And now, Behind the Faucet by Dwell.
Maybe Behind the Faucet, yeah. Maybe Behind the Faucet. I mean, I might give the franchise a slightly different name. But no, it really just, if I have you over for dinner and I've got a new couch, I not just invite you to sit on it without mentioning, hey, this is by a designer, they're based in Antwerp, their studio is a mess, but their aesthetic's really minimal, and it's made of this, and you're going to tell the whole backstory. So
I came over on a C-130 and it landed right outside my grandma's house.
I guess. Sure. However you got here, I'm going to tell you all about my new couch and who made it, where it's from, what the origin story is, why. There's a story about craft there. There's a story about contemporary and historical ideas about design. There's all of this sort of kind of bound up in the object itself, which hopefully is very beautiful in an immediate way as well. I mean, that could be the story I tell you when you come over for dinner. That can also just be the Instagram caption when I bring it home. But having that backstory is really critical. I mean, that's how people want to relate to the objects in their life anyway, whether it's their entire house or it's, we want to advocate for it being about more than simply, disposable decor.
Right, because we have relationships with these pieces of furniture.
Yes, I frame my identity around it. I frame my identity around being the sort of person who tells you the backstory about the couch, or being the sort of person that reads Dwell.
Right.
That's fundamentally it. So, I mean, there are other practical things.
All kinds of emotions. I have some end tables I'm really angry at, but we haven't worked that out yet.
Oh, that's great, though. I love the idea of keeping furniture around because you hate it. That's a good story. That's much more interesting than the steep grade change, although that can be interesting, too. I don't want to dismiss the traditional ways of describing the way that architecture works, but I also kind of want to get into more of what does it actually feel like to be there, and what does this mean on a human level for the people who experience it.
So it's really been wonderful to talk with you. I just have one last question.
Sure.
To your knowledge, does anyone here have a Dwell tattoo?
Oh, a dwell tattoo. No, I didn't. I haven't really asked the team, but maybe I should do a little survey on Slack.
A little survey might be in order, because that might be the first one for you. You rejected me, so maybe dwell is next.
I don't think you're allowed to reject me as a dwell. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, George.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nichiha.com/US Modernist and by Angela Roll, your Modernist Realtor, 919-995-0550.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive Modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.6 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at george@usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Our esteemed guests get thoroughly Googled by Chief Researcher Cindy Stratton, not a real name, from her secret underground bunker that she asked us not to tell you about. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another charming and delightful episode of U.S. Modernist Radio.
So charming and so delightful.